final session is about teaching inclusively online. All too frequently, when we move into an online setting, we tend to not bring with us some of the inclusive teaching strategies that we might use in the classroom setting. So I want to take a little bit of time just to think through some of that, and it's a bit of a whirlwind tour, but just to think at least briefly about practices of inclusive teaching. Many of the things we've talked about thus far in this workshop will serve to support inclusive teaching. Multiple modes of engagement and thinking about who your students are and finding ways to engage them and to elevate student voices and to have all voices heard. All of those things, many of those things support inclusive teaching. But I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about Universal Design for Learning, UDL. UDL is a research-based set of principles that help us design materials so that they can be accessible to everyone. There's two main things that UDL focuses on, and that's flexibility and reduction of barriers. So the flexibility is how can you pay attention to what it is you want to teach, and then are there different ways you can teach that? If somebody needs a special accommodation and doesn't easily do it in the way you were planning on doing it, how can you find a different route to getting that same learning goal met? You might think about the way the information is presented. So there's oral and written, but there's also putting captions. There's having recordings available. There's all sorts of things to think about in the context of how you present information, how students are assessed. There's many different ways to assess students. And so think about forms of assessment that rely on different kinds of learning and skills. So there's testing, quizzes, but there also might be presentations or essays and reflections. And then finally, how do you engage students? Students engage in different ways, and we've talked about that a lot today, different ways to engage students and to think about that diversity as in part is an accessibility and inclusion issue. The other part of the UDL that is focused on is reduction of barriers. And again, how can we make accommodations and supports that will allow the student to get to the same learning goals, but might support them in ways that could help them show you their mastery of the material. And it's not just about accommodating students, but about really challenging them, because the end goal is to challenge all students to become the best learners they can. The Center for Applied Special Technology, or CAST, and the website is here at the bottom of the slide, has a great amount of resources and information around UDL, and particularly around this first area of flexibility, of different ways to present, assess, and engage students and information so that it can be accessible to all. They also can talk to them about the accommodations. And so that's a great website if you're wanting more information. Setting community norms. We often do this as a way to make our classrooms more inclusive, and in the online setting, it's important. There's certainly all sorts of norms of engagement on the internet that we don't want to replicate. So I think it's really great to have some set up community norms. What do you expect? How do people engage? And many of you have probably done these in your classroom, having to do with treating people with respect, expecting the best from someone, responding to the issue, not the person, all sorts of things like that. And if this was a synchronous session, we'd do some brainstorming on what various people have used. I think this is a really powerful way to set those kind of ground rules for interaction in your class. However, I want to give the caveat to pay attention to diversity and equity issues when setting up these community norms. Sensoy and D'Angelo, and the references down at the bottom, have written a good paper, and others have too, but have written a particularly strong paper that talks about how some of the community norms that many of us use, and myself included, that actually can serve to increase unequal power relations in the classroom. So because they're often driven by the interests and the needs of the dominant group of students, they can tend to suppress the voices of the non-dominant group of students. So when we talk about issues like safety or assuming the best, we want to think not only from the perspective of the dominant majority students in our class, but what about the non-majority students in our class? I think D'Angelo and Sensoy do a really good job of talking about this and providing some alternatives. And so I'd recommend that to you. We want to think about student identity and when we're thinking about inclusive teaching. How is it that our students can better be seen and know that they are being seen? How is it that we can know them better and for them to know that they're being known? Because if we don't know who they are, we aren't going to be able to help bring in their voices and utilize the skills and perspectives that are unique that they bring to the classroom, and which is the basis of a lot of inclusive teaching, is not only including everyone, but utilizing the diversity of their experiences and perspectives to the good of the learning experience. So we want to identify strategies to learn about their backgrounds and their skills and expertise, and also to think about the identities that they carry and how those identities have various challenges that can impact the student learning experience, and to really think carefully about how our classroom is supporting or helping to eliminate the barriers caused by student identity that might be impacting student identity. And the final thing I would say is to reflect on our own identity, that the identity that we bring is going to color how we teach, what we teach, and we want to really carefully be aware of what identity we're bringing and what biases that might be bringing to the classroom. Similar to what we did when we talked about what tools you use in the classroom and how those might help us reach certain goals, I would ask you to think about a little bit about tools that are available to you and how those tools might serve different populations of participants in your classroom or programming. And we won't do this as an activity here, but I would ask you to think about the tools and how they might support inclusion and reaching different populations. So just to kind of summarize a little bit about the inclusive teaching, you want to think about it as much in your synchronous online programming as you would in a face-to-face classroom. The UDL provides a good accessibility framework. Think about those community norms and make sure that they're supporting the inclusive diversity and equity goals that you have. You want to create a community where the differences are seen, known, and celebrated. And you need to explicitly ask for participants to participate and encourage them in many different ways, giving them opportunities to participate. Be available, include a statement about accessibility in your syllabus. So that's the end of the inclusivity section. And in fact, it's the end of our workshop. So I want to thank you very much and just mention that these materials have been developed over the course of about a decade by many people in the CIRTL learning community, many people who have instructed and have contributed intellectually to this kind of growing knowledge base of good practices in synchronous online teaching. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, Robin Greenler, at info@CIRTL.net. Thank you, and thanks for participating.